October 22nd, 1941. Kalinin Front, west of Moscow. The morning air is already winter cold. Frost sits on the canvas of field tents. Telegraph lines whistle in the wind, and the roads east are nothing but ruts of frozen mud and splintered wagon wheels. Smoke hangs low over the captured rail junction like a bruise. Oberstleutnant Ernst Weber steps down from the Sedkavze 251 half-track, pulls his gloves tighter, and stares at the rail yard with a tight jaw. This, according to every report, was supposed to be a prize. For weeks, German intelligence had circled this town in red pencil. Important industrial node, the map said. Machine tools, electrical motors, gear cutters. Wehrmacht staff officers whispered about seizing working Soviet factories, flipping the lights back on, and having spare parts for panzers shipped straight to the front. Some officers said this was how they would finish the war before the new year. Instead, Weber is looking at silence. The main factory complex still stands, brick walls, unbroken windows intact. But inside, it's a skeleton. The assembly halls are hollow. Rows of grease-stained outlines mark where heavy presses used to sit. Power cables dangle from the ceiling like veins cut clean. The overhead cranes are still here, but their hooks are empty. Someone took everything. Sir Hauptmann Kruger jogs up behind him, breath smoking in the cold. He's young, too young for the deep lines already forming around his eyes. Rail office records. You'll want to see this. Weber flips through the logbook. The handwriting changes midway through October, more frantic, like the clerk was writing at a dead run. 38 flat cars loaded with lathes, milling heads, stamping presses. 22 gondolas carrying electrical dynamos and motor casings. And workers reassigned to evacuation labor. Destination Chelyabinsk, Sverdlovsk, Novosibirsk, east of the Urals. He stops walking. East of the Urals, Chelyabinsk, Weber mutters almost to himself. That's 1,500 kilometers behind their own lines. Kruger nods. And sir, look at the dates. Weber looks. October 15th, October 16th, October 17th. This place was still making war parts last week. Now the machines are gone, the furnace is cold, and the only things left are burn marks on the floor and a few crates of bolts not worth the fuel it would take to haul them. Weber turns to face the machine hall again. He tries to picture the scale of what it would take to move an entire factory in 3 days. You don't just move a factory. You unbolt 20-ton presses. You drag out casting lines. You torch through drive shafts, disassemble turbines, crate everything. Put it on rail under threat of Luftwaffe strikes and advancing panzers. You find crews, locomotives, cold track clearance. You do that while artillery is rumbling less than 30 kilometers away. And somehow the Soviets did it. He hears shouting from the far end of the hall. Grenadiers from the 86th Infantry Division have rounded up a handful of locals, mostly older men and women, a few teenagers in oily overalls. Arms raised. Faces ash-gray from exhaustion rather than fear. Who was in charge here? One Feldwebel barks in rough Russian. A woman answers. She can't be more than 19. Scarf knotted tight over her hair, jaw set like iron. Plant director gone east, she says. All equipment east. We go next. East, where Ural, she says. Just that, Ural. Like that word alone explains everything. Weber notices something else. In the corner of the hall, near where a line of machine tools must have stood, there's a chalk message on the wall. It's in Russian, but even with schoolbook German, he can piece it together. Not one lathe for Hitler. Weber doesn't smile. He doesn't swear. He just exhales long and slow. He understands in that moment what most of Berlin still refuses to admit. They didn't capture Soviet industry. Soviet industry slipped out of their hands while they were still marching. The plan? Hitler's plan was simple on paper. Drive fast, take the resource heartlands. Seize Ukraine's grain, Donbas coal, Leningrad's factories, Moscow's rail hub. Starve the Red Army of fuel, steel, and tanks. End the campaign before winter. But what if Weber thinks staring at the naked factory floor winter comes anyway? And Russia still has tanks? He looks again at the logbook. Chelyabinsk. A city he'd barely heard of in peacetime. Now it's swallowing entire factories like firewood. He closes the book and hands it back to Kruger. "Send this to Corps headquarters," he says quietly. "Mark it urgent. They need to see this." Kruger hesitates, then asks, "Sir, do you think it matters this late?" "We're at the gates of Moscow," Weber answers without looking at him. "If they can take apart a factory in 3 days, he says they can keep this war going longer than we planned." He doesn't say the other part out loud. Longer than we can survive. Outside, somewhere in the gray distance beyond the tree line, artillery starts. Heavy. Soviet. Closer than yesterday. There is no silence east of the Urals in the winter of 1941. There is only steel. The rail yards at Chelyabinsk scream and grind at all hours. Locomotives cough black smoke into air so cold it burns the lungs. Cranes groan, chains snap taut, and the sound of steel on steel echoes off the snow-choked platforms like hammer blows inside a cathedral. A line of factory girls, some still in school scarves, some already missing fingertips to machine accidents, are guiding a lathe off a flat car. The machine weighs as much as a truck. They move it like it's a baby being carried into a new home. This place used to be a tractor works. Now people call it Tankograd. In late 1941, entire Soviet industrial plants were torn out of cities like Kharkov, Leningrad, Moscow, and Gorky, and sent here beyond the Volga, beyond the Urals, beyond anything a German Panzergruppe could reach. Machine tools were bolted to new factory floors before the walls were even finished. Assembly lines were drawn in chalk while the roof was still being welded overhead. Conditions are brutal. Workers sleep in barracks made from freight crates. Food is black bread, cabbage-thin soup, sometimes horse meat. Temperatures sit so low that breath turns to ice on scarves in minutes. There are children shoveling coal at 2 a.m. But here's the part no German front officer sees it works. By December 1941, and into 1942, output starts to flow. T-34-76 turrets, V2 diesel engines, Christie suspension assemblies, stamped road wheels, welded hull plates. Over and over and over. This is not, we will rebuild after the war. This is, we are rebuilding during the war. The logic is terrifying in its simplicity. The Germans can destroy a tank. They cannot destroy a tank factory that is now 500 kilometers behind the line and still moving. In Sverdlovsk, in Magnitogorsk, in Uralmash, in Omsk, the pattern repeats. Evacuated factories reappear like transplanted organs. The Soviets aren't just replacing lost tanks. They're creating the promise of overwhelming replacement. A German Panzer III burns outside Tula. The Soviet answer is not, we mourn that tank. The Soviet answer is, there will be 3 more next month. In Moscow, before the retreat, engineers unbolt precision boring machines under artillery fire. In Leningrad, under siege workers dismantle optical grinders for tank sites and send them across Lake Ladoga on ice roads. In Kharkov, crates of V2 diesel engine molds are loaded under Luftwaffe bombing runs. It is evacuation as a weapon, and it's centrally directed. Stalin's State Defense Committee, GKO, and the People's Commissariat of Tank Industry are not asking. They are ordering. Entire workforces are deported with their machines. Families ride in the same rail cars as their factories' crankshafts, sleeping in between piles of oiled steel like it's furniture. One engineer coat pinned shut with wire writes in a freezing logbook by lantern light, "Final boring head installed. Line tested. Production resumes 03:20. First hull weld by 06:00. All of this is happening while the German army, frozen, undersupplied, tied to horse carts, bleeding men to frostbite by the thousands, is still telling itself that the Red Army is on the verge of collapse. Back on the front line, Oberstleutnant Weber doesn't know the full picture. How could he? He doesn't see the full rail map. He doesn't see the labor decrees. He doesn't see the quotas. But other men in gray uniforms are beginning to see it. Signals officers are intercepting traffic about Ural relocation. Recon pilots are reporting smoke columns from new plants far east of any known industrial zone. Interrogations of prisoners keep turning up the same word, evacuated. And then there are the tanks. In October, German panzer crews were told the Soviets were running out of armor. By January, they're fighting fresh T-34s with clean welds and factory paint that hasn't even had time to chip. Impossible, one German company commander writes in a field report near Mozhaisk. We have destroyed them in great number. Yet new ones appear winterized, wide-tracked, with crews who do not seem to care if they live or die. What he's actually seeing is industrial math. If Germany needs 6 weeks to replace a burned Panzer IV, and the USSR needs 10 days to push out another T-34 hull in Chelyabinsk, then the curve lines cross somewhere around spring 1942. And when two armies are bleeding each other dry in winter, the side that can refill faster is the side that lives to tell the story. A freight whistle cuts through the Urals night. Another train arrives. Doors open. Crates slam down. A foreman yells engines to line 2, turrets to assembly hall, B. A teenage welder looks up, face lit orange by sparks. Her eyelashes are rimmed with frost. Her expression is not hopeful. It's not patriotic. It's something colder. It's endurance. February 1942. Army Group Center Rear Headquarters, Smolensk area. The map room smells like damp wool and cigarette smoke. The front line is drawn in thick pencil, bending like a cracked spine around Moscow. Red pins mark Soviet counterattacks. Blue pins mark German positions that on paper are holding. Everyone in the room knows holding really means exhausted freezing and down to half strength. Major Dieter Hahn, Logistics and Material Assessment. 9th Army lays a typed summary on the table between two generals. No one speaks for several seconds. They all know what this document is. Berlin has been asking the same question since December. How long until the Soviet tank threat collapses? Hahn clears his throat. Our assessment, he says, voice-controlled, is that it does not collapse. One general exhales through his nose. Another looks at the floor. Hahn continues. We have captured Soviet vehicles in the last 10 days whose castings are new. Their weld seams are new. Their optics are new. Some were manufactured in facilities we have not yet identified. We assess these vehicles were assembled east of the Volga and shipped forward by rail. Hahn turns a page. We also note an increase in field repairs. Damaged T-34s are being recovered, refurbished, and reissued at a rate faster than ours. They are rotating hulls and engines through depots as if they are interchangeable modules. That last part to a German officer in 1942 is almost offensive. German armor is precise. German armor is engineered. Parts are machined to tolerances that make mechanics proud. A Panzer is built like a prestige watch. The T-34 is built like a hammer. You can swap major parts fast. You can weld a patch plate over yesterday's hole and send it right back to the line. You can teach a 19-year-old conscript crew how to keep it alive in a snowstorm. And this is the part Hahn doesn't say out loud, because it's treasonous to even think it doesn't matter if the crew dies. The machine itself can be rebuilt and crewed again. Hahn goes on. Our reconnaissance believes the Soviets have relocated a significant portion of their heavy industry, including machine tools, rolling mills, and engine plants east of any range currently available to the Luftwaffe. We do not possess the fuel or aircraft range to interdict these facilities at scale. Translation: we can't bomb them. We estimate, Hahn says, that approximately 1,500 industrial enterprises have been moved behind the Urals into Siberia and into Central Asia. Many appear to be already operating. Output appears focused on armored fighting vehicles, artillery, and ammunition. The older general finally speaks. That is not possible. Hahn doesn't flinch. With respect, General, it is happening. Silence spreads again. This is the moment the myth breaks. German doctrine assumed a short war in the East. Operational thinking, even at army level, is built on tempo, shock, encirclement, annihilation. Kiev, Vyazma, Smolensk. Giant pockets where entire Soviet armies disappear. The Wehrmacht feeds on that momentum. It needs it. It was promised that momentum. But momentum doesn't matter if the enemy is willing to bleed for time and use that time to move a nation's lungs and heart. On 500 kilometers east, plug them back in and keep breathing. The younger general taps the report with 2 fingers. What is your recommendation, Major? This is the part Hahn has been dreading. There's no elegant answer, no operational tweak, no just shift Panzergruppe 3 north and we'll be in Gorky by March. He swallows. We cannot outproduce them now, he says. Not if this continues. We can win battles. We cannot win a production race against a country that has already moved its production beyond reach. The room is very quiet. No one writes that sentence down. Hahn leaves the map room an hour later. He buttons his greatcoat and steps outside. The wind knifes through him. A column of wounded men limps past the headquarters truck bay. White bandages, frost-bitten hands, blank stares. Most of them don't even look like soldiers anymore. Just pale faces wrapped in gray wool moving because someone told them to move. Hahn thinks about the numbers again. 1,500 factories. Reloaded east, still working, feeding the front. He realizes something that makes his stomach turn. This war is no longer about Moscow. It's about time. And time suddenly belongs to the other side. July 1942, February 1943. The Volga is on fire. Stalingrad is not just buildings and streets. It's grain silos turned into bunkers, tractor factories turned into fortresses, assembly halls, turned into last-stand barricades with machine guns set up between still warm lathes. German infantry squads fight for a room, then lose it, then retake it, then lose it again. Men die for stairwells. Men die for boiler rooms. Men die crawling under still-running conveyor belts. Here's what matters, even in the middle of this nightmare. The Red Army keeps bringing in armor. Not pristine divisions marching in parade order. Not big sweeping Panzer-style thrusts. Instead, drips, streams. A handful of T-34s at a time ferried across the Volga under artillery patched overnight, thrown straight into block-by-block fighting in the northern factory districts. Tractor Factory, Barricadi, Red October. Some of those T-34s, German observers note bitterly, still smell like fresh paint. This is the Urals arriving at the front. Chelyabinsk, Sverdlovsk, Uralmash, Tankograd. All those names Weber first saw in a dusty rail logbook back in October 1941. They are here now in steel with 76.2mm guns and diesel engines that shrug it cold. By November 1942, the Red Army doesn't just defend Stalingrad. It encircles 6th Armée. Operation Uranus slams into the weaker Romanian and Italian flanks, protecting Paulus's rear. Soviet armored and mechanized units punch through from north and south, meet at Kalach, and snap the traps shut. Over 200,000 Axis troops are surrounded. Germany is stunned. High Command calls it a temporary situation. Luftwaffe Chief Goering promises the pocket can be supplied by air. He's lying to himself. Everyone else already knows it. But in the field among officers like Weber and Hahn, the shock isn't just the encirclement. It's the speed at which the Soviets can now mount an operation like this. Last summer, the Red Army was bleeding to stand still. Now it is planning multi-front offensives, coordinating armor-artillery guards, rifle divisions, and logistics over hundreds of kilometers in winter. That requires command. That requires fuel. That requires tanks. And tanks now are not in short supply. The encirclement at Stalingrad becomes starvation. German radios crackle with desperate calls for ammunition. Bread, medical supplies, spare parts. Freezing soldiers burn furniture to stay alive. The Volga keeps bringing more Soviet shells, more grenades, more replacements. Paulus asks for breakout permission. Hitler says no. On January 31, 1943, Friedrich Paulus, recently promoted to field marshal, partly because no German field marshal had ever surrenders anyway. The Invincible Six, Armee is gone. In Berlin, speeches promise revenge. At the front, officers like Hahn and Weber don't hear revenge in the wind. They hear something else. Consequence, because this is what industrial relocation really bought the Soviet Union, not just more tanks. Not just more shells. It bought the ability to keep hitting even after losing catastrophically. It bought second chances. The Germans have no second chances left. When Kursk comes in July 1943, the largest tank battle in history, with Panthers, Tigers, Ferdinands rolling in against layered Soviet defenses, the Wehrmacht is throwing in its last big armored gamble. The Red Army, by contrast, is bleeding on purpose. It has depth. It has prepared lines. It has reserves. And behind those reserves, the Urals are still working. By mid-1943, the German army can feel the math closing like a fist. Replacements arrive late, under strength, under-fueled. Soviet formations, while mauled, come back faster with fresh armor and better coordination between infantry, artillery, and tanks. Weber, now gaunt, watches a new wave of T-34s crest a shallow ridge near Belgorod. They're not elegant. They're loud, dirty, brutal machines belching diesel smoke and dust. The sun flashes off their angled armor plates. For a brief second, his mind flashes back to that chalk message on the factory wall almost 2 years ago. Not one lathe for Hitler. He finally understands what it really meant. It wasn't defiance. It was a timetable. He lowers his field glasses. "This is over," he says quietly. The lieutenant next to him blinks. Sir Weber doesn't raise his voice. "They can afford this," he says. "We can't." By winter 1943, German officers are no longer asking whether they can win. They are asking how long they can delay the collapse. The answer, though, no one will admit it yet, was written the moment the first Soviet flat car rolled out of Moscow in October 1941, with a 20-ton press chained to its deck and a teenage machinist asleep on top of it.